But first, a classic example of the leftist-dominated American media's hypocrisy and opportunism. Watch this clip from MSNBC's Joy Reid, who claims the media's focus on the Ukrainian conflict is racist.
Okay, let's face it. The world is paying attention because this is happening in Europe. If this was happening anywhere else, would we see the same outpouring of support and compassion? Well, we don't need to ask ourselves if the international response would be the same if Russia unleashed their horror on a country that wasn't white and largely Christian. Because Russia has already done it in Syria. This is a teachable moment for us in the media. We aren't afraid to call out our own industry. There is a lot of soul searching that we need to do in Western media about why some wars and lives seem to matter more than others.
I see. It's a case of white privilege. Now, call me sceptical, but I don't think Ukrainian civilians on the receiving end of Russian air attacks would agree with Reid's claim. By her logic, the West would not care if China invaded Taiwan, which we know is not true. But the most ridiculous thing about her comments was that just a few weeks earlier, she argued the opposite.
What used to be sort of collective Western values, but apparently now not for, a huge chunk of Republicans and their media people. Can you explain for those who do not understand why American media, why we are covering this and why we must care about what happens to Ukraine?
We are undoing what came, and I can't even emphasize this enough, what came from the Second World War, what Americans died and fought for in the Second World War. If we allow Putin to just waltz into the Ukraine and seize territory, what's next? I mean, clearly his eye is not just on Donbass. It's not just on the Ukraine. As we saw in his speech today, he wants to rally back some sort of Soviet, rising from the ashes here. And it's not going to be just Ukraine. And frankly, it's not just going to be Russia. We're talking about China looking at Taiwan. I mean, this is upsetting the whole entire world order.
So to clarify, if you're not interested in defending Ukraine, you must be an evil Republican who couldn't care less if the entire world order collapses. But if you now care about defending Ukraine, you're a racist. Can this get any sillier? Commentator Concha summed it up best.
This is the same person, by the way, who called Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas Uncle Tom on the air. The same person who said Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is rooting for COVID deaths of children in his state. This is the same person who said that white supremacists elected Glenn Youngkin and Winsome Sears, who at last check is black, in Virginia, a state that Joe Biden won by double digits. I could go on, but, we got finite time here. So it's no surprise while women and children and innocent people across Ukraine are being systematically targeted and murdered by an insidious Vladimir Putin and his forces, Joy Reid makes it about the media being racist, which I guess includes NBC News, since they've been covering the war pretty heavily, just like everybody else.
It really is sickening stuff. Imagine being a Ukrainian refugee watching news stories about a hospital filled with pregnant women being blown up by Russia. And this idiot, Joy Reid, wants you to turn your horror into a political point-scoring exercise. But she will suffer no career impact for her ridiculous comments because the left protects the left. They only cancel conservatives, remember? And this is not an isolated incident. MSNBC and Joy Reid have form when it comes to stoking racial hatred for political gain. Remember when the brutal and tragic murder of the US woman Gabby Petito occurred by her boyfriend? Well, to Reid, that was nothing more than an evil media being stricken with what she called missing white syndrome.
No family should ever have to endure that kind of pain. And the Petito family certainly deserves answers and justice. But the way this story has captivated the nation has many wondering, why not the same media attention when people of color go missing? Well, the answer actually has a name: missing white woman syndrome, the term coined by the late and great Gwen Ifill to describe the media and public fascination with missing white women like Lacey Peterson or Natalie Holloway, while ignoring cases involving missing people of color.
If you water down the significance of a woman being murdered just because of the colour of her skin, you are the racist. If you find yourself trying to convince people or journalists not to cover an invasion as extensively because the majority of the victims are white, you are the racist. Don't let these activists hijack the conversation and convince you that it is immoral to feel empathy for a fellow human. Well, joining me now is lawyer and commentator Caroline DeRusso and Director of Communications at the Institute of Public Affairs, Evan Mulholland. Evan, why don't we start with you? Do you think it's racist that the media has focused a lot on Ukraine?
Reid's comments are typical of the modern left, pitting people against each other based on race. But we're seeing the tragic war in Ukraine take away from a lot of distractions that the left are usually obsessed with, a lot of the identity politics. So Reid, it's race, and bring it back to race. You've got John Kerry out there saying this shouldn't just distract from climate change. And you've got people on the ABC saying it's going to make COVID worse. So we're seeing people trying to get in the normal distractions that's been obsessing them the past 2 years into this conflict and make it about their own obsessions instead of the humanitarian tragedy we're seeing on the ground. So I think these kind of comments are just petty and people will see right through them and the media games they're playing.
Caroline, look, I don't understand why they actually keep her on air. I'm not calling for her to be taken off. But the significance of what's happening in Ukraine cannot be underestimated. They're irresponsible comments, aren't they, by Joy Reid?
They are irresponsible, but it's best that they are on national television so that we can all see what that very progressive side of politics actually thinks about human suffering and, all the compassion that they always bang on about. Now that there's the opportunity for them to actually exercise that compassion, and they don't think that the people who are suffering are worthy of it. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary. But like Evan said, it's actually totally on brand.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and it just really shows that there is this subsection of the community out there, Evan, who they put their ideological trappings before journalism, but then they still call themselves journalists.
Too right, and you have to look at the floods this week, then bringing in climate change and things internationally, especially in Ukraine, trying to bring their own ideological pet peeves into the conversation, make it about the media, always making the media and the media commentary the conversation, like we saw with The Guardian last week, disgracefully attacking News Corp journalists. We see it over and over again. Instead of actually reporting on the stories on the ground, whether it be the floods, whether it be Ukraine, they're making the conversation about themselves.
Well said, Evan.